The Centurion Project. Written by the 8th Day of Night. Chapter 27. The Royal Canterlot Wedding. Section 2, Part 1. As Elias limped through the trees, he scanned for any branches that would make good crutches, while at the same time, scanning the brush for any changelings that could be creeping about. While it was important to keep an eye out, looking about also had the added benefit of allowing him to ignore the looks that Luna was giving him as she led their group forward. Nightflash stalked the rear, diving in and out of the bushes as he did his best to blend in with the background. More than once Elias lost track of the Pegasus, only for him to appear from the branches of a tree or crawling on his belly through the dirt as he crept through from bush to bush. A low buzzing was Elias' only warning of an attack before two changelings dropped from the trees to bar their path forward. Elias pushed off Luna and lurched forward, dragging his broken leg behind him as he limped at the enemy. Though he couldn't understand them, Elias was sure the changelings were laughing at him. He couldn't accept help, however. Luna still refused to join in the fray for some mysterious reason, and a call from Nightflash told Elias that the Pegasus was facing his own opponents. Elias let out a war cry to better ignore his broken leg as he swung hard at the left changeling, hoping a superior reach would work in his favor. The changeling easily dipped back, and the second one hissed, lashing out with his hooves to swing at Elias' chest. Elias blocked the swing with a cut from Feather, the blade biting deep into the changeling's leg. The creature hissed and fell back, and Elias moved to pursue it. The left changeling struck, slamming into Elias' shield in an attempt to bite at his face. Elias tucked his cheeks below the shield edge, and he felt teeth scrape against his helmet. He grunted in pain as he adjusted his right foot to better hold his balance. Then Elias shoved outward, pushing the bug back, allowing him to swing at the approaching right changeling. The slash took the creature's jaw, and it collapsed with a wet scream. The left changeling was startled into stillness. Elias showed no mercy and cut its creature, then finished off the jawless one. With the fight temporarily finished, Elias fell on his left knee as exhaustion caught up to him. He felt sweat pool under the rim of his helmet, and rivers of sweat rolled down his back, soaking his tunic as he tried to ignore the stabbing pain in his right leg. He really wished he hadn't broken the limb. Even a serious bruising could be ignored. But broken bones? They were already exacting an enormous toll on his energy, and the pain lancing through his crippled limb would only get worse the more he moved on about it. Luna helped the human to his feet, guiding his arm around her neck as she pushed forward, a goo-stained Nightflash darting to her side to check on them before disappearing back in the trees.
"Come, Elias,"
Luna said, her voice a near whisper.
"We are not far. We shall get to you proper medical treatment."
"I'm fine," Elias grunted in reply. "I can still swing a sword, so I can still fight."
"Of course you can, guardsman,"
Luna answered. She waved the other ponies on, and they continued pushing through the gardens, following a series of increasingly obscure paths as Luna guided them toward her personal safe room. Elias really wondered why they hadn't covered it during training, but assumed it was for this very reason. The changelings had made excellent infiltrators, so much that Elias hadn't even noticed that Scarlet was physically different. The human mentally chastised himself for letting the Pegasus' strange behavior go unquestioned. He should have pressed harder, then maybe he would have known what had happened to his friend. The acknowledgement that he was out of the loop so completely caused Elias to stumble momentarily, his foot tripping over the loose stone. Luna was quick to drag him back up, forcing the human to lean against her heavily as she pressed on. Though she said nothing, Elias caught the look of concern she gave him. He decided to ignore it, his thoughts becoming panicky as he wondered where Bookbinder was, where Scalpel was, and especially what had happened to Scarlet. The infirmary had been cut off. Was Scalpel dead? Captured? The same could be said of Scarlet, who had started acting differently weeks ago. Was the Pegasus being held somewhere, or was he dead, unnoticed by anyone close to him until the last possible second? Elias shuddered his mind tore itself in a rage. Fortunately, the changelings provided an excellent distraction as more seemed to crawl from the woodwork. The three of them squared off against Elias as he pushed himself to his feet once more. They grinned as the human limped forward, Feather hanging limply in his grip. Elias looked between them, looking for signs of an attack. "Come on, you bastards," Elias thought, making his lip more dramatic as he closed another foot of distance. "Take the bait." The center changing leaped forward, but in an instant its body hit the ground with a thud as the head rolled away, bouncing along the ground with a green trail spilling goo in its wake. Elias gave a shout and let the motion of his strike follow through completely, his trajectory ending on the right changeling's cheek. The bug leaned away, saving its face from being cut in two, but the tip of the blade still cut a long scar along its cheek, spilling thick drops of goo into the dirt. It glared at Elias as the left changeling attacked. Its horn charged green as it sent a bolt of energy into Elias' side. His shield was a second too slow, and the bolt drove air from his lungs. His muscles clenched, tight and frozen as the energy raced down his body. Elias mentally thanked Anyon for his armor that countered the magic defense within seconds, letting him dip back as the right changeling tried to gore him with its horn. Feather parried the sharp bone away as Elias retreated another step, trying to find balance on his broken leg. A bit of goo caused his sandal to slip, and for a moment, Elias hung his balance by a thread. Luna called out to him, screaming his name in what sounded like panic. The left changeling's eye locked onto the noise, and as Elias planted his left foot and caught himself, it lurched around him, its horn pointed at the alicorn's chest. Time slowed to a crawl as Elias made a decision. The changeling's tail was close, and if he grabbed it, he could stop the creature with a brutal punch to the face using his shield hand. That plan, however, exposed his back to the right changeling, and he knew full well that if he went with that plan, he would get hurt. Badly. The other option was to ignore the changeling and hope that Luna could kill it without its help. Given her recent track record and the looks of terror the pony was giving the back-shelled creature, Elias knew what he had to do next was going to hurt. His hand clamped down on the changeling's tail and ripped it backward, drawing a yelp from the creature. Its neck snapped as his scutum slammed into its chin, and its body fell away as Elias tried to turn around to address the threat to his rear. Not fast enough. What felt like a blade made of pure fire tore through his left hip, scraping against the bone as a black horn poked through the front of his armor. A brief spot of rage at the injury led Elias' elbow backward, shattering the horn from the changeling's head. It wailed in agony as it fell back, clutching the base of its broken appendage. Elias was on the creature in seconds, pummeling it with his scutum. He slipped to his shield through his arm, gripping it with both hands as he slammed the edge down, over and over into the changeling's jaw. The head caved in after the third hit, and it was little more than a puddle after the fifth. Elias fell onto his rump after the seventh hit, his scutum sliding from his grip as he clutched at the horn, piercing his side in wordless agony. Even the slightest of touches sent a bolt of agony through his ribs, shortening his breath to nothing as he held back a light stream of blood pouring onto the ground. Elias scrunched up his eyes and rocked as he tried to pull the horn free, but when the pain threatened to make him black out, Elias stopped, his breath coming in gasps as he prepared to cast about for his fallen sword and shield. Luna was waiting when his eyes opened, her face pressed against his as she said words that he couldn't hear. Elias blinked dumbly at her as he found that his ears were ringing in a terrible racket, blocking his hearing quite effectively. Her eyes caught his, and her mouth seemed to move faster, but Elias could only shake his head, pointing to his ears in a sign that he was temporarily deaf. It took a few more seconds, but her voice broke through, first a whisper, then a low shout as his body kicked back into gear.
Elias, please, I need you to rise.
Luna pleaded. She looked over her shoulder, and Elias followed her eyes to find that Night Flash fighting with no less than 7 changelings. One of his wings hung limp at his side, and his helmet was missing as he dueled the bugs for dominance. The other Pegasus was gone, while the unicorn lay twitching in his blood. A nasty hole burned through his throat. Only the maid was uninjured, and Elias suspected that she wouldn't be much longer if the pair of changelings creeping from the bushes were any indication. Elias felt 2 things first. First, he felt the hilt of Feather pressed firmly into his hand by Luna's hoof as she begged desperately for him to get up. The second was deep rage. So far, he hadn't lost anything. Nobody important to him had died yet. That was going to change soon if he didn't get up and fight. Whatever thoughts about Equestria being a land of peace fell to the wayside. This was no training exercise. It was no game. It was life or death, and there was never a time that he offered himself to death without a fight. Elias felt his left eye twitch as he felt rage tear into his soul, eating away the pain in his nerves. Elias pushed himself to his feet. He forsook his shield, instead choosing to draw the dagger he kept behind his back. A deep, never-touched piece of his mind begged for a release, and Elias took only a second to put a tight leash around the creature, making sure it knew who was friend and who was foe. Once the distinction was made clear, he set loose with one job in mind: kill changelings. Elias let out a bloodthirsty howl as he sprinted forward, tackling the pair of changelings. Though they hissed and tried to shake him, he fought not just with sword and knife, but with tooth and nail as well. Despite their hard shells, the ears of the changelings were like normal bony ears, and Elias had no issue tearing them away. His teeth sank in deep, the foul goo pouring into his mouth as he growled and writhed, shaking his head back and forth to cause as much damage as possible. He spat away the ear in his mouth and latched into another as he plunged his dagger through the eye of the one changeling, while Feather tore through the guts of the other one. The changeling struggle began to slow almost instantly. Knowing that the creatures were as good as dead, Elias was back on his feet in an instant, his eyes hungry with a feral desire to kill. That desire turned to bloody hatred as he heard Nightflash yelp in pain. A line of blood poured from the pony's flank, and the sight of it sent Elias' rage to new heights. Like a demon, Elias ignored the crunch of his leg bones as he sprinted forward, Feather decapitating two changelings with a single swing, the tightly packed bugs working to his advantage as he hit them blindly. Out of the corner of his eye, Elias was able to take in much of the remaining battlefield as he headbutted a changeling in his face, shattering its muzzle as his dagger bit into its skull. Nightflash had moved back, staring at Elias in horror as he dragged the maid to safety with Luna. Luna, who was also staring at Elias in horror as he tore through the changelings like water flowed through a riverbed. His gladius sang as blood and goo spattered the trees. Elias took many hits, but he simply didn't care. He was immune to pain, immune to hurt as his body ignored it all, the rage fueling his domination of the changelings. Even when another pack of them dove into the fray, the fight remained one-sided. He cut through changeling after changeling, spilling more blood than he had seen in months. Feather cut through one changeling's leg, severing the limb. With the force behind the swing, the gladius followed through and bit into another changeling's face. A part of him was horrified by the pride he felt as their bodies collapsed with shrieks of pain. But that part was ignored as he concerned himself with the last bug. It stared at him in open-mouthed shock as he advanced on it, an ungodly, blood-covered specter of death towering over the tiny creature. It whimpered and covered its head with its hooves cowering at its feet, its back firmly pressed against the trunk of a tree. And with the lake of Elias' wide swing, the bug had nowhere to go. It would be simplicity itself to end it with a swing to the throat. Elias stopped, however. The creature at his feet was terrified of him, and it clearly wasn't going to be fighting anymore. Elias felt his rage slip away as he looked around him at the gore-soaked battlefield around him, most of it caused directly by him. Dozens of bodies covered the ground like a carpet. Elias didn't look directly behind him. He already knew that the ponies were watching him for what he did next. He looked back to the changeling. It had peeked an eye out, likely wondering when the sword that would end its life would come. Feather dripped with gore, and at a glance at his dagger found that the blade had shattered. The blade had fallen away at some point in the fight. Elias snorted and discarded the useless hilt. Then his eyes fully settled onto the changeling, and he made a split-second decision. Feather stabbed into the tree, right next to the changeling's head. The creature shrieked in terror, cowering once more. When nothing else happened for a few precious moments, the small changeling peeked out with its wide eyes up to Elias, who glared hatefully down at it. "If I have your word that you'll leave now, and never return, I'll let you live," Elias said with a growl. The changeling stared at him in pure shock.
You'll let me go?"
It said, its voice sounding a bit garbled, but otherwise completely coherent. Elias leaned closer, trying to ignore the rising pains from his body. The changeling hid behind its hooves again. "Don't think this is just an act of mercy. You have to do a job for me." Elias grabbed the changeling's chin, forcing it to look at the slain bodies that carpeted the ground. "See that?" Elias asked, pointing to the changeling body that had been cut in two. "That's what waits for each and every one of you ugly freaks that decide to fuck with me." Elias punched the changeling in the muzzle and released his hold on the creature's face. The bug rubbed his nose, then quivered when he saw Elias still towering over him. "You tell all your little friends what's going to happen to them if they come after us." Elias jabbed his finger at the bodies. "Because that is just a warm-up. Now get out of my sight before I cut your eyes out." The changeling nodded furiously as it slipped away, fleeing silently into the bushes. Elias removed Feather from the bark of the tree, passing the sword to his left hand while his right clutched at the horn stabbed through his hip. Exhaustion and pain covered his body like a blanket, trying to coax him to sleep. He swayed for a moment as he closed his eyes, sightlessly staring into the leaves as he debated just giving in. Just a nice little snooze, a little calming darkness. Then he didn't, choosing instead to limp very slowly back to Luna and Nightflash. They both moved to aid him, but he waved them away. If he leaned on either, he wouldn't get back up. His leg was on fire with pain, and was his hip. Though the pain paled in comparison to the agonizing pair of wounds, the dozen or so bites and cuts he had on his arms and neck still hurt. The berserker fit had fully fled his system, the monster thrown back into its cage. Elias could feel it as he struggled to walk. We need to move," Elias said. Luna nodded solemnly as she passed him with a scutum in her hooves.
"Yes, Godsman, we do. Come, We are not far.
Elias motioned for Night Flash to take the lead while he brought up a slow, plodding rear. The maid was now wholly terrified of him, pressing tightly against Luna's wing, casting frequent glances back at the human as they moved slowly along. It took a few minutes to reach Luna's destination, but they remained unopposed. The tree swayed lightly in a chill spring breeze, and with the sweat that coated Elias's brow, it made him shiver slightly as he limped into the small clearing behind Luna. It was a relatively simple area. 2 benches sat on opposite sides of each other of a white stone circle in the center, while the middle was occupied by a tall marble statue of a pony on its hind legs, waving a flag in its teeth with Luna's cutie mark on it. Luna walked up to the statue, then braced against it as she attempted to push it aside. It didn't so much as budge. The Alicorn sighed, then motioned to the bottom of the statue.
The tunnel to the safe room is beneath this statue. Move it and we can get in. Once inside, the door shall seal, permanently, from within and without, and we will be safe for a time being. Should we need to run further, there is another exit lower on the mountain.
Elias looked at Night Flash, and the pair limped up to the statue. On a 3 count, the two shoved with all their remaining strength, and slowly but surely, they moved the statue aside. A small sewer grate was hidden underneath the statue. Elias breathlessly motioned Night Flash to open it. As the Pegasus did so, Elias motioned to Luna. "Princess, you're first with the maid, then Flash, then me." Luna frowned and shook her head as Flash pushed the cover aside, giving it close enough to hold to drag it back easily.
Absolutely not, Guardsman. You are horrifically injured. You shall go first so that we can assist you. Please, get inside.
Elias was not in the mood to argue. He shook his head and took a lurching step forward, his hand clamped on her shoulder, and he roughly shoved Luna towards the sewer grate. She yelped in surprise, stumbling towards the hole. As she caught her balance, she spun on the human, fury in her eyes.
How dare you treat me like that, Elias? She snapped. I am your princess.
Who hasn't done much today, has she? Elias snapped in reply. We've fought like dogs and lost more than a few along the way, yet you can't seem to be bothered to so much as swing a sword. Elias shoved her again, grunting in pain as the motion pulled on the wound on his side. So, since I'm the heavy lifter, I get the last say. Now get in the hole before I use what little life I have left to throw you in it. Luna opened her mouth to protest, but Night Flash gently touched her other shoulder and guided her towards the hole.
He's right, Princess, the Pegasus said carefully. I know you have a good reason for holding back your magic, but you can't do any good up here. And quite frankly, it's our job to hold the line while you escape. Red knows what he's doing, and he'll be right behind us. He shot a look at Elias, and the human nodded. The faster you're inside, the faster we're safe, Elias said. Luna stared at him hard, but upon seeing that he wouldn't budge, she sighed then nodded. Fine. We shall follow your plan, Guardsman Bright, but rest assured that this will have consequences. Elias opened his palm to show off a black horn in his armor. It already has, Princess. Now get in before we're spotted. Luna turned around, then stepped down with her back hooves. As her head disappeared into the hole, Night Flash put the maid in after her. Elias limped over to the sewer hole, his eyes up as Night Flash began to climb down. Elias nudged the grate closer to the hole with his foot, keeping all of his senses tuned outward. His left eye twitched as the loud buzzing reached his ears. Elias glanced down at Night Flash, and from the look on the Pegasus' face, he heard it too. A hoof came up, touching the second to the last rung as the Pegasus began to rise. Elias couldn't allow that. Night Flash cried out as Elias shoved the grate closed, planting his left foot firmly on the stone as over a dozen changelings touched down, with one familiar one thrown to the ground before the rest. The changeling whimpered as the one in dark blue armor impacted the ground next to it, kicking the comparatively tiny creature. The armored changeling core charged and it grabbed the changeling by the throat, holding it up as it looked at Elias. Elias felt the desperate shouts of Night Flash beneath his foot, but he ignored them as he tried to ease what tension he could from his exhausted body. Apparently, the day had decided it was never going to end. Joy.
Is this the creature you said killed our brothers?
The armored changeling asked the small one. The small changeling squeaked as Elias glared at it, and it tried to shy away from him, on which, unfortunately, brought it back to face the armored changeling. Said changeling sneered at the little bug.
I guess that's a yes.
It cackled. Cruelly, the armored changeling threw the small one to the ground, towering over it like Elias had.
Trax, you've got to be the weakest, most worthless changeling I have ever met.
The armored one snarled. It kicked Trax again, and the small changeling whimpered as it curled into a ball. Elias watched it with all disinterest, even a slight touch of pity. If he was going to fight, he'd much rather deal without all of the posturing. It was dull to watch. Luckily for him, the armor changeling ignored Trax and turned to Elias, grinning widely. It stood silent, then a violent shiver passed through the creature. The blue eyes became green, and Elias felt the air crackle as power seemed to suddenly radiate from the creature.
I must say, human, you have done well to intimidate my hive.
The changeling cackled in a decidedly female voice, taking a few steps towards Elias.
Already the echoes of your fighting are being felt throughout all of my subjects. Tell me, what is your secret to go on as disfigured as you are?
Elias shrugged, looking around the circle of changelings. His best count was 23, but there could at least be a dozen more in the trees. Meat usually helps, Elias replied. That, and years of hardened combats against fighters that would make your own wet your pants. But what can I say? His eyes took on a dangerous glint as he glared daggers at the changeling. They couldn't be that tough. I killed them, after all. The changeling snorted and laughed.
Indeed, human. Had I not already felt the frequent deaths of my subjects at your hands, I might as well think that was a pointless boasting.
The changeling glared at Trax.
Unfortunately for me, this one was very descriptive about your actions. A violent, unstoppable changeling-eating monster. He called you. I shall look very carefully through his memories to find the truth.
The changeling looked back to Elias.
But I have no doubt that you will be mildly impressive at least. Some minor entertainment after conquering of Canterlot, no doubt.
Elias rolled his eyes. Why is it always the way with you wannabe tyrants that you say you've won before you've actually done so? He snorted. As long as I breathe, you lose. Every time. The changeling smiled widely, and a nasty chuckle spread amongst the black bugs. The armored one shook his head.
An interesting choice of words, human, and given your valor in the face of annihilation, I shall grant your request. Death in battle it shall be.
The changeling snorted in distaste as his green eyes studied its bloodied body.
Unfortunately, it would appear that you have spent much of your fight on my lesser subjects, and therefore are not a real challenge for my captain. This will not do if I wish to test his new abilities.
Elias growled and twirled feather in his hands. I have more than enough fight left to kill all of you. The changeling threw its head back and laughed.
Now there's the foolish bravado I am used to hearing.
The changeling wiped a tear from his eyes and shook his head.
No, human, you do not have that strength. Perhaps a drone or three, but not this force, and certainly not my captain.
The changeling tapped its hoof against its chin.
But I am a merciful queen, and as such, I wish for all of my subjects to meet their needs in life, and that includes you, human. Short your servitude may be.
Queen? Elias asked. I honestly expected more than... He waved his sword at the armored changelings. Well, this. The changeling frowned.
Uneducated whelp. I shall forgive that transgression only because you will die soon. You will never gaze upon the true visage of Chrysalis, queen of the changelings. This vessel merely acts as a conduit for my consciousness while I take the elements of harmony hostage.
The changeling waved its hoof.
You are a minor plaything, nothing more. Celestia is in a pod, and Luna will follow. The conquest of Equestria is a foregone conclusion.
The changeling grinned at Elias.
So, let us quit this idle chatter and make with the fun. I wish to see a powerful pony defender die today, and so I will. Choose an injury, and I shall heal it. It shall make the fight more enjoyable.
Elias snorted. Do you really think I'm that stupid? He asked. The second I let you close enough, I'm done. No contest. Elias slammed his gladius against his scutum. I think I'll die like a man, thank you very much. The changeling rolled its eyes.
Fine. Be prude like the ponies.
The creature's horn lit up with a brilliant green aura, and Elias tensed, ready to spring into action, only for the changeling to begin speaking rather than attacking.
I, Queen Chrysalis of the Changelings, pledge my word that I will heal a single wound with magic and no other action against the human before me. So it is bound.
The changeling's horn pointed at Elias, and the creature frowned as its magic sputtered out. It tilted its head, confusion visible on its face.
You have no magical signature?
The changeling asked.
That is most odd.
Elias shrugged. Comes with being a human, if you don't mind me asking. What was that thing you just did? He asked, waving his fingers at the lingering green in the air. The changeling continued staring at him with narrowed eyes.
A simple truth, Gesh, forcing the user to keep their word at the cost of death. It had nothing to lock onto you within, however. Most strange indeed.
The changeling stared at him for a moment longer, and shook with visible irritation.
Cease your distracting nature at once,
it shouted.
Choose the wound or die quickly like a common animal. Make your choice, human.
Elias sighed. He had nothing else to lose. The voices shouting below his feet were gone, with Luna and Night Flash likely giving up and retreating to safety. He tapped his right leg. Might as well go out swinging. It's broken, he said simply. I won't be able to fight with a limp.
Very well,
the changeling replied. Elias tensed up as green auras surrounded his leg, but the changeling did as promised. The bone snapped into place, drawing a grunt from Elias. But within seconds it was mended, with only a trace of pain left over in the fixed limb. Elias kicked out with the leg, straightening his balance. The horn in his side was agony, but now that he could walk, it was almost bearable. Elias watched the armored changeling shuddered again, and blue eyes returned. The creature grinned fairly at Elias, and it drew a pair of nasty-looking blades from sheaths on its back. The first was a longsword, crackling with green energy that raced up and down its black blade. Elias couldn't tell if it was the shape of the sword, but it looked serrated near the tip, which he found odd. The other weapon was a relatively small hand axe, but it too crackled with energy. A sickly black energy seemed to seep through the air around the jagged axe head. Elias made a mental note to avoid that blade at all costs. The armor changeling cackled loudly, and he and Elias began circling one another. Elias tried to balance between staying relaxed and maintaining his combat stance, instead of his usual place on top of his scutum. His gladius hung at his side, the blade twinkling in the sunlight. The changeling stopped momentarily over the sewer grate, tapping on it with its hind leg. It didn't budge, and Elias had no doubt that it had just sealed, just like Luna said it would. It brought a small grin to his face, and the changeling grunted softly as he moved on. The two circled back to their original positions before they stopped, squaring off against one another. The rest of the changelings seemed to close in, forming a loose circle around the combatants, save for one. Trax attempted to scurry away, only for two changelings to grab the little bug and turn him around, forcing him to stare Elias down. The armored changeling snorted in disgust as he glared at the smaller changeling.
Watch closely, Trax. I shall show you how a true changeling fights. This human creature will be dead in minutes.
The armored changeling grinned at Elias, and the human responded by falling fully into his combat position, wincing as the horn shifted in his hip. Elias took a deep breath, watching the changeling's eyes closely. The bug stared arrogantly back, but for once, Elias wasn't sure that the emotion was misplaced. The changeling had many advantages, some of which Elias didn't even know about. If nothing else, the fight was going to be a hard one. He squashed his self-doubt, and with one more calming breath, he lunged forward. Feathers screeched against the changeling's sword. The blow intended to take the bug's head off parried away as the axe descended on Elias's left side. The blade bit into the wood of Elias's scutum, and the human was horrified to see the black magic leaching the color from his shield. Elias lashed out with his knee, clipping the changeling in the chin, forcing the bug to fall back. It swung wildly at Elias's head, which he easily ducked under as the axe ripped free of his shield. Elias took a few quick steps back, waving his gladius to ward off any attacks. He then reset his stance, raising his shield in time to block a brutal swing from the changeling's sword. Elias dipped to his left, grunting in pain as the axe parted in the air next to his right shoulder. The wound in his hip was already giving him issues, and they had just started. Despite his hatred for the changeling queen, he sent her a brief word of thanks for the healing. The fight would have ended already if the leg was still broken. Feather glanced across the changeling's armor, leaving more than a scratch as glowing black sword came down again, scarring the boss of his scutum. Elias tried to kick out again, but the axe came down on his leg and he was forced to dart back. He hissed as fire ran up his thigh. It had been a glancing blow, but whatever magic the blade had, it left a nasty pain behind. It felt like the leg was broken anew, and Elias had put great effort into not limping. The changeling grinned widely, its fangs shining at Elias as it cackled.
Do you feel that, human? It's a lovely new magic our queen developed. It has so many wonderful effects.
Elias growled as he fell back, ready to drive the changeling away, but the creature merely stood still, watching him as it continued to laugh. Elias glanced down at the wound in his leg, scowling as he saw the black substance surrounding the wound. He wondered briefly if it would prevent it from healing. In a moment of distraction, the changeling pounced forward, its wings buzzing as both blades came down on Elias's head. Elias suppressed a scream of agony as the sword bit into his shoulder. His scutum had blunted the blow, but the sword cut through his armor like it was made of paper, sending a fresh patter of blood to the ground as the changeling ripped it free. As close as they were, the motion was just slow enough to allow Elias to get his own stab in, and Feather found a temporary home in the changeling's flank, stabbing deep as he found a chink in the thick blue armor. The changeling howled in pain, and the two headbutted one another, drawing back as they inspected their wounds, all while continuing to stare hatefully at each other. A light stream of blood dipped into the ground as Elias pressed down on his shoulder. It hurt, and the blade had cut deep, but he could still feel his sword hand, and the wound didn't have the black magic lingering around it. He could still fight. He just needed to move faster. The changeling glared at Elias as it limped, his hind leg twitching occasionally as Gru dipped into the dirt.
You will pay for that with blood, human,
the changeling growled.
Promises, promises,
Elias responded flippantly. Then the two were at it again, blades clashing as their fighting began anew. There we go. A fantastic action-packed chapter, and one that is close to my heart, as this is one of my favorite scenes in TCP, at least until we get to, like, the third season, I would call it. That aside, I would like to thank my wonderful Patreons. Thank you, my Tier 1 Patreons, Squall Windfeather, Rainflicker, Starlight Blaze, Dreamless Portal, Thine Tiny Equine, and Stu Hex. My Tier 2 Patreons, Captain Blue Shadow, Sword Brethren Mordred, Solus, HKH4 aka Texture, and the Animated Ghost. And of course, a large thank you to Silent Titan. I appreciate your guys' support so much, and it means a ton to me. If you want other ways to support me, well, of course, liking, commenting does help in the algorithm, and of course, subscribing would mean a ton to me. That aside, this has been Firehearth. Have a wonderful day.